Have you ever noticed that every time you get excited about something new, it feels like you finally found the thing? You buy the books. You watch every tutorial. You spend hours practicing. You tell your friends about it. For a while, it feels like you've discovered a completely new version of yourself. Then, a few months later, it's over. The guitar stays in its case. The camera sits on a shelf. The coding course is still open in a browser tab you'll probably never revisit. The sketchbook gathers dust. And eventually, someone asks, "How's that new hobby going?" You hesitate. You smile awkwardly. Then you quietly answer, "I kind of stopped." Maybe you've had that conversation dozens of times. Maybe you've stopped telling people what you're interested in altogether, because you're tired of hearing the same response. Didn't you quit that too? After enough of those moments, something starts to happen. You stop questioning your projects, and you start questioning yourself. Maybe I'm just lazy. Maybe I have commitment issues. Maybe I'll never be good at anything because I never stick with it. It's a painful story. Not because someone else told it to you, but because, over time, you started telling it to yourself. And here's the strange part. You know you're not lazy. Lazy people don't spend entire weekends obsessing over learning a new skill. Lazy people don't stay awake until 2 in the morning because they can't stop researching something fascinating. Lazy people don't disappear into a project for 8 hours without noticing they're hungry. You've done all of that. Probably more than once. So why does it keep happening? Why do you fall in love with something, only to lose interest when everyone else seems to keep going? Most people have a simple answer. You just need more discipline. Successful people finish what they start. You have to push through. It sounds reasonable. In fact, it's probably advice you've heard your entire life. But what if that advice was designed for a different kind of mind? Imagine asking a marathon runner to train like a sprinter. Or asking a jazz musician to play every note exactly as it's written. Neither of them is broken. They're simply built for different kinds of performance. So what if the same is true for curiosity? What if the problem isn't that you can't commit, but that you've been measuring yourself with someone else's definition of success? From the time we're children, we're taught that life follows a straight line. You choose one subject, then one career. You become really good at it. You stay with it for decades. That's what commitment is supposed to look like. And for many people, that path works beautifully. There are people whose minds genuinely thrive on going deeper and deeper into one discipline. The world needs those people. They're the surgeons who master a single procedure. The scientists who dedicate decades to one question. The musicians who spend a lifetime refining one instrument. But here's the mistake we make. We assume that because one path works, it must be the only path. So when someone moves differently, we don't ask why. We assume something is wrong. Maybe you felt that. You finish the most interesting part of a project, and suddenly your energy disappears. Not because the project became impossible, because it became predictable. You don't hate it. You're just done. Except you don't call it done. You call it quitting. And that single word carries an incredible amount of shame. Think about all the things you've abandoned. The language you almost learned. The business idea you couldn't stop thinking about. The online course that's still 73% complete. The instrument. The sport. The notebook filled with plans. What if I told you? Those things might not be evidence of failure at all? What if they're evidence of a completely different way of learning? Because here's something almost nobody tells curious people. Sometimes, what looks like quitting from the outside is actually finishing. Not finishing the project. Finishing the lesson. And once you understand the difference, you may never look at your past the same way again. Let's try a different way of looking at your past. Think back to one project you walked away from. Maybe it was learning Japanese. Maybe it was photography. Maybe it was coding. Or maybe it was something completely different. Now forget how it ended for a moment. Instead, ask yourself one question. What did I actually learn? Not what I produced. Not what I finished. What did I become capable of because I explored it? Maybe you learned how to think visually. Maybe you became comfortable speaking to strangers because photography forced you outside your comfort zone. Maybe coding taught you how to solve problems logically. Maybe music trained your patience. Maybe writing helped you organize your thoughts. When you look at it this way, the project suddenly looks different. You didn't walk away empty-handed. You left carrying something invisible. Something that became part of you. And that's where I think we've misunderstood what curiosity actually is. Most people believe curiosity is about collecting information. But I don't think that's true. Curiosity is about collecting transformations. Every experience changes the way you see the world. Every challenge reshapes the way your brain connects ideas. Every skill becomes another lens through which you understand life. And here's where things become really interesting. Many highly curious people aren't addicted to novelty. They're addicted to growth. Those two things sound similar, but they're completely different. Novelty is chasing what's new simply because it's different. Growth is chasing the feeling of becoming someone you weren't yesterday. At first, those two experiences often overlap. A new hobby feels exciting because everything is unfamiliar. Every day you improve. Every mistake teaches you something. Your brain is constantly rewarded because every session reveals another piece of the puzzle. Time disappears. Hours feel like minutes. You forget to check your phone. You forget you're hungry. You forget what time it is. Psychologists sometimes describe this kind of deep immersion as a flow state, a condition where the challenge matches your current ability so well that your attention becomes completely absorbed. It's one of the most rewarding experiences the human mind can have. But something eventually changes. Not overnight. Gradually. The learning curve begins to flatten. The questions become smaller. The surprises become fewer. The mystery starts disappearing. You already know how to play that song. You already understand the basic programming concepts. You already know how to use the camera. Now the work becomes repetition, refinement, practice. For many people, this is where mastery begins. But for certain highly curious minds, this is where something else happens. Their brain quietly asks a different question. What's next? Not because they dislike the current project. Not because they're incapable of discipline. But because the part of the experience that fed their curiosity has already been satisfied. Imagine hiking to the top of a mountain because you wanted to see the view. Once you reach the summit, you don't keep climbing the same peak forever. You look around. You appreciate what you've discovered. And eventually, your eyes drift toward another mountain. That isn't failure. That's exploration. Yet somehow, when it happens in our careers, our hobbies, or our lives, we call it quitting. Maybe that's the wrong word. Because quitting implies giving up before something had value. But what if the value wasn't at the end? What if the value was in the climb itself? Think about children for a moment. A child can spend hours taking apart a toy, not because they want a broken toy, but because they want to understand how it works. The moment they understand it, their attention naturally moves somewhere else. We don't accuse the child of having commitment issues. We call them curious. Somewhere along the way, adults stop receiving permission to be curious. We're expected to justify every interest. Every hobby must become a side business. Every passion must become a career. Every skill must lead to measurable success. But what if some experiences exist for a completely different reason? What if a project's purpose isn't to last forever, but to teach you something you couldn't have learned any other way? If that's true, then maybe the question isn't, why do I keep quitting? Maybe the better question is, how do I know when I've actually learned what I came here to learn? Because once you can answer that, everything changes. In fact, there's a pattern that many curious people unknowingly repeat over and over again. A pattern so predictable that once you recognize it, you'll start seeing it in almost every project you've ever started. And that pattern has a name: the commitment decay cycle. The commitment decay cycle isn't a medical diagnosis. It's simply a pattern that many highly curious people recognize once they look back at their lives. It usually unfolds in 4 stages. The first stage is excitement. This is the moment you discover something new. A YouTube video, a book, a conversation, an idea that suddenly refuses to leave your mind. Your imagination immediately jumps into the future. What if this is the thing I've been looking for? You picture yourself becoming fluent in a language, building a business, playing beautiful music, designing incredible products. You haven't even started, but your mind is already exploring the possibilities. Then comes the second stage, immersion. This is where your brain comes alive. You don't need reminders. Nobody has to motivate you. You wake up thinking about it. You go to sleep thinking about it. You spend hours researching, practicing, experimenting, and making mistakes. People around you start saying things like, "You're really into this." And they're right. Because this isn't casual interest. This is complete engagement. For a while, everything feels effortless. But eventually, you reach the third stage, competence. This is the point where the impossible becomes familiar. The confusing concepts start making sense. The challenge becomes manageable. The mystery begins to disappear. You can finally play the song. You understand the software. You know how the system works. From the outside, this looks like success. But inside your mind, something subtle begins to change. The excitement becomes quieter. You notice yourself opening YouTube, not to learn more about your current project, but to explore something completely unrelated. At first, you ignore it. I should stay focused. I need more discipline. I can't quit again. So you force yourself to continue. You sit down to work, but instead of curiosity, you feel resistance. Instead of energy, you feel obligation. The project hasn't become harder. It has become familiar. And for a curiosity-driven mind, those are not the same thing. Then comes the fourth stage. Redirection. Your attention starts moving toward a new challenge. Not because you failed. Because your brain is searching for another steep learning curve. Another puzzle. Another mountain. Another mystery. And here's where so many people become trapped. They think the solution is to fight the cycle. To force themselves to stay. To ignore every instinct pulling them toward something new. At first, that sounds responsible. But imagine forcing yourself to reread the same chapter of a book. Every single day. For 6 months. Even if you loved that chapter the first time. Eventually it stops teaching you. The words haven't changed. You have. Sometimes we confuse persistence with progress. They're not the same thing. Persistence is valuable when it moves you forward. But persistence without learning can quietly become stagnation. Now, this doesn't mean you should abandon every difficult project the moment it becomes uncomfortable. That's a completely different pattern. Growth often requires working through frustration, confusion, mistakes, boredom. Every meaningful skill includes those moments. The question isn't, is this difficult? The real question is, am I still growing? Those are very different questions. If you're still discovering new patterns, still stretching your abilities, still becoming someone slightly different each week, keep going. But if you've honestly reached the point where the project has already given you what you came for, maybe you're not standing in front of a failure. Maybe you're standing at a finish line. Not the finish line everyone else expected. Your own. I like to call this your personal endpoint. The moment where your curiosity says, "Thank you. I've learned what I needed here." That doesn't erase the value of deeper mastery. Some people genuinely love refining one craft for decades. There's something beautiful about that. But it's not the only beautiful path. Some people become exceptional because they go deeper. Others become exceptional because they connect. They carry ideas from one world into another. They see patterns that specialists never notice. Because they've lived in many different worlds. History is full of people whose greatest strength wasn't staying in one lane. It was building bridges between lanes. And maybe, that's closer to your path than you've ever allowed yourself to believe. But there's still one important question left. If following every new curiosity leads to overwhelm, and forcing yourself to stay leads to burnout, how do you actually organize a life like this? How do you explore without feeling scattered? How do you honor your curiosity, without drowning in endless unfinished projects? That's where one simple system can change everything. Not by limiting your curiosity, but by giving it a home. The Backburner System. If you've spent years bouncing between interests, there's a good chance you've been trying to solve the wrong problem. You've been asking, how do I stop wanting new things? Maybe that's not the question. Maybe the better question is, how do I create a life where curiosity has structure? Because curiosity doesn't need to be suppressed. It needs to be managed. Imagine your mind as a kitchen. You have several pots on the stove. If you try to cook 10 meals at the same time, everything burns. Not because you're a bad cook. Because you've exceeded your attention. But if you choose only a few pots to actively cook, while keeping the others safely on the back burners, everything becomes calmer. That's the idea behind what I call the Backburner System. It's surprisingly simple. Create 3 lists. The first is your active list. These are the only projects you're allowed to actively work on. Not 10. Not 15. Just 2 to 4. These are the projects that currently deserve your attention. Everything else has to wait. Not because those ideas aren't exciting. Because your attention is limited. The second list is your backburner list. This is where every exciting new idea goes. A business idea. A language. A book you want to write. A hobby you suddenly became obsessed with. Instead of feeling guilty for wanting something new, you simply place it on the list. You haven't rejected it. You've protected it from becoming another source of overwhelm. And something interesting happens. Many ideas lose their urgency after a few weeks. They weren't lifelong passions. They were moments of curiosity. Others stay. Weeks later, months later, they're still calling you. Those are the ideas worth returning to. Then comes the third list. The one most people never create. Your archive list. This isn't where failed projects go. It's where completed learning journeys go. Write down every project you've explored. More importantly, write down what it gave you. Maybe photography taught you composition. Maybe coding taught you systems thinking. Maybe music taught you patience. Maybe traveling taught you adaptability. Maybe writing taught you how to organize complex thoughts. Your archive becomes evidence. Evidence that you've been growing all along. When your inner critic whispers, "You never finish anything," open your archive. Look at everything you've become capable of. You'll realize something remarkable. Your life isn't a collection of unfinished projects. It's a collection of completed lessons. And that's a very different story. Because stories shape identity. If you believe you're a quitter, every new interest feels dangerous. But if you believe you're a curious learner, every experience becomes valuable. The projects don't define you. The person you're becoming does. Maybe you'll still leave some hobbies behind. Maybe you'll still discover entirely new passions next year. That's okay. The goal was never to become someone who never changes. The goal is to become someone who changes intentionally. Someone who explores without shame. Someone who finishes learning, even if they don't finish everything else. And maybe, years from now, you'll look back at all those hobbies you once apologized for. The guitar, the camera, the sketchbooks, the business ideas, the languages, the books, the countless moments where you thought, "I failed again." And instead of seeing a trail of abandoned dreams, you'll see something completely different. You'll see a map. A map that only makes sense when viewed from above. Every path, every detour, every unexpected turn, leading to the person you've become. Because perhaps your greatest strength was never your ability to stay on one road. Perhaps it was your willingness to explore many of them. So the next time someone asks, "Why don't you ever stick with one thing?" maybe you won't feel the need to defend yourself. Maybe you'll simply smile. Because you'll know something they don't. You weren't collecting unfinished projects. You were collecting perspectives. And one day, those perspectives will become the one thing that makes your work impossible to replace. If this video helped you see yourself differently, I'd like to invite you to stay for the next chapter. Because understanding why you leave projects is only half the story. In the next video, we're going to explore something even more fascinating. Why curious minds fall in love with new ideas so intensely in the first place, and how to use that energy without letting it control your life. Until then, be curious, be intentional, and remember, you are not behind. You are not broken. You're simply building a path that doesn't look like everyone else's. And sometimes, those are the paths worth walking. See you in the next one.